Amateur Traveler is in its 20th year now, but can you imagine if I had people on the show who had never been to the destination, but had just read about it or seen a movie about it? That wouldn't make any sense at all, and you wouldn't listen. We all know how important it is to receive advice from people who know a destination to get the most authentic local experience. And a great option for experiencing this is Explore Worldwide and their authentic small group adventures, led by local tour leaders, perfect for solo travelers who want to meet like minded people with a desire for adventure. I'm often an independent traveler, but two of my last three trips were with small group tours because they organize everything and it's a lot easier. If you want to recreate the tour I did to Malta, they have a Malta and Gozo Discovery Tour. I'm intrigued by one of their tours called A Taste of Sicily. The company again is Explore Worldwide, and visit exploreworldwide.com to learn more. And thanks to Explore Worldwide for sponsoring this episode of Amateur Traveler. The nights are long, the days are short, and the weather is chilly to downright cold, depending on where you are. It's a good time to slip into a Quince iconic Mongolian cashmere sweaters, which start at only $50. You can treat yourself to everyday luxury at an affordable price with Quince. If you really want to dive into luxury, you can check out their leather handbags, washable silk shirts, and European linen sheet sets. Whatever you're looking for at Quince, all the prices are 50 to 80% less than similar brands, and they do that by partnering directly with top factories and cutting out the middleman. They only work with factories that use safe, ethical, and responsible manufacturing processes. And of course, they use premium fabrics and finishes for that luxury feel in every piece. But you've already heard me rave about my Quince travel pants. Treat yourself this winter without the luxury price tag. Go to quince.com/traveler for 365-day returns plus free shipping on your order. That's QUINCE.com/traveler to get free shipping and 365-day returns. Quince.com/traveler, and thanks to Quince for sponsoring this episode of Amateur Traveler. This episode of The Amateur Traveler is brought to you by Audible. Please visit audiblepodcast.com/traveler for your free downloadable audiobook.
I got my bags packed, I'm on a roll. I'm heading out there and I'm ready to go. I'm looking real good in my passport photo.
Amateur Traveler, Episode 176. Today, the Amateur Traveler goes to the Lone Star State. In less than the time it takes you to drive across it, we'll tell you where to go when you go to Texas. Welcome to the Amateur Traveler. I'm your host, Chris Christensen. Before we get into this week's interview, I do have three news stories for you. The first one is a cautionary tale about someone who was on a cruise ship, but it was in a U.S. port, and he picked up on his wireless card a signal which he assumed was his free domestic signal, but instead it was an international roaming signal from the ship. And he was hit with a $27,789 bill for a single wireless session, even though he was in Miami, Florida. He was credited for that and didn't have to pay it, but think of that next time you're using your computer on a cruise ship. Speaking of having to pay for things you always thought would be free, Ryanair has not dismissed the idea of charging to use the toilets while flying. They wouldn't be a pay toilet with coins. It might be a swipe of your credit card, but they haven't ruled it out. And in other good news for flyers, if you've had a problem with United Airlines and you're outside of the U.S., don't try calling their international phone line as of April because they are disconnecting it. Their explanation? People who use email or write us are more satisfied with our responses. So they're just thinking of you. For links to these stories, as well as other news items, check out the show notes at amateurtraveler.com. Before we get into today's interview, I am excited to announce that we have a new sponsor for the show, which is audible.com. That is the leading provider of downloadable audiobooks for your computer or your MP3 player. Audible has 50,000 titles to choose from, and you can try one free. You can get a 14-day free trial if you go to audiblepodcast.com/traveler, as I just did, and sign up for a 14-day free trial. You can get a free downloadable audiobook. So again, that's audiblepodcast.com/traveler. If you're not sure what book to try, I might recommend the book In a Sunburned Country by one of my favorite travel authors, who is Bill Bryson. So check that out, audiblepodcast.com/traveler. I'd like to welcome to the show Dennis Cheatham, who's come to talk to us about his home state of Texas. Dennis, welcome to the show.
Howdy.
I say home state. You grew up in Texas?
You know, I've grown up here all my life, though I was born in Louisiana, but got here as soon as I could. So when I was 2, my folks moved to Dallas. So I call myself a Texan.
All right. And you have a Texas site also, lovefortexas.com. And so we assume you have some love for Texas. You and I have talked a little bit before we started recording here about how do you even try and tackle a state as big as Texas in the format of one show on the Amateur Traveler. We're going to challenge you to do that. If I were to come to Texas for a week or 2 weeks, what should I see?
Gosh, Texas has so many stories and so many regions. One amazing thing I remember seeing in a film was Texas is just so big that just about any kind of weather is happening all at the same time. So it's kind of a hard thing to think around. But if I were to tell someone to come to Texas, what they should see, what's truly unique about Texas that you got to see, there are big cities that you could fly into very easily. I live up here near Dallas, and so I'd say Dallas is a great place to come into. We've got DFW Airport,
Sure.
which is actually bigger than, I think it's almost as big as a state. I forget which one, but anyway, it's massive.
Yeah, I've tried to get from one end of the airport to another during a layover. I understand what you're talking about here.
Flying into DFW, get here from anywhere. The airport's huge, but coming out of Dallas, definitely I'd spend some time here in the Dallas-Fort Worth area, because Fort Worth and Dallas, they're kind of this weird twins of cities where you have Fort Worth, it's real laid back, it's Cowtown, but surprisingly, Fort Worth has amazing museums, fantastic contemporary art museum.
Oh, interesting.
I'm an artist myself, so obviously I appreciate that, but they've also got some great parks and all kinds of awesome activities all year over in Fort Worth. It's just really kind of the laid back. While you got Dallas, very metropolitan. You want amazing dining, you want fantastic arts, you want great nightlife. It's pretty much there in Dallas. So Dallasites, just to be quite blunt, can be a little snobby, but they know it because they've got a pretty metropolitan city on their hands, while Fort Worth folks are real laid back. Either one, you're going to get a great flavor. But then after you see the cities, you got to get to the country. I just finished taking a trip last week where I got to see some parts of Texas I hadn't quite seen. And interestingly enough, I actually went on Texas Independence Day, which is March 2nd. It's actually a state holiday. Drove down to Washington on the Brazos, which is south of here on your way down to Houston. That's where the Texas independence was proclaimed by the signing of the Declaration of Independence. But it's piney woods down there. It's starting to get a little bit rolling hills. So I'd say get out of the cities and make sure you see the small towns like Brenham. Bluebell ice cream, for any of those who are not near Texas, is a homegrown ice cream. It's been around forever, and it's amazing, amazing, amazing ice cream. You can go to the creamery, but the people out in rural Texas are just so fun to interact with. So I would get out and pick your favorite town. There are towns like Brenham, towns like LaGrange. As you head further out, if you've got more time, because Brenham's about 4 hours from Dallas, and 4 hours here in Texas is nothing, really, if you're driving. But you could head out west. I'd scoop around maybe Brenham, Washington on the Brazos, and head my way on down to San Antonio. San Antonio has great flavor. It's such a cultural city. Of course, the Alamo. One surprising thing, I just took a friend of mine there for his first time ever. He was like, it's really not that big. Should I feel bad feeling that way? No, it's okay. It's not that big, but there's a ghostly kind of aura about the Alamo. And maybe I just feel that way because I'm a Texan, but hanging out in San Antonio to see that Spanish and Mexican culture that San Antonio has is really special, especially on the Riverwalk, which, yeah, it's a touristy thing, but it's still really special. It feels strangely genuine.
Let's not assume everybody knows what the Riverwalk is. Remember, not
The
even all of our
Riverwalk-
listeners are from the U.S. here, so...
Yeah, very true. Very true. I speak of the Riverwalk as if it's around the corner. The Riverwalk is actually the San Antonio River, which is just more of a creek than a river. It's pretty small. But this area has been walled in and planned, so the river flows through very gently. It's more of a standstill, more like a pond. But actually, little roving boats, barges, if you will, seating about 10 or 12 can sit on them, and they'll take you through the Riverwalk, where on either side there are restaurants, shopping, and all kinds of things to do. So it's really a neat place to be, certainly a great place to people watch. It's a really slow pace just to hang out on the river, watch some people, drink a margarita. Really great place to hang out. The Riverwalk's very special. And it's actually very near the Alamo. It's all within walking distance down there in downtown San Antonio.
And when we say the Alamo, I'm going to assume that there's at least a few listeners who don't know what we're talking about. But we're talking about, I want to say Texas version of Thermopylae, but that's going to go over the head of a few people. Basically, a last stand from some Texas patriots during the Mexican-American War who all died there, and the rallying cry for the brief period of time that the war went on after then was "Remember the Alamo." So,
indeed, it was that war for Texas independence. The siege of the Alamo lasted for 13 days, and Davy Crockett actually fought. Davy Crockett, a legend from Tennessee, and it stood for 13 days under great duress. I believe it was about 183 Texans and volunteers all held off the Mexican army, but they had no chance against thousands, and it fell on March 6th, 1836.
And the only thing I would correct in that is I believe they were actually Texians at the time.
Indeed, they were Texians. Very good and very accurate. I appreciate that. Yeah. I figured, Texans general, but Texian. Yeah.
Before we get on, you talked about Texas being big. I want to give some people some idea of the scope of how big. If I started way over at the western border of Texas, and I was on the interstate, and I was driving highway speeds, how long would it take me to drive across?
Well, driving across Texas is something I've actually done, at least from Houston to El Paso. El Paso's in the furthest left corner, all the way in the west. If you head all the way to the east, it'll take about 15 hours to drive across Texas if you're going about 60 or 70 miles per hour here. Actually, I got the figures. It is 773 miles wide. That's 1,244 kilometers wide.
Okay. We were last at the Alamo and the Riverwalk.
Yeah, the Alamo, the Riverwalk, just San Antonio is very special. But heading out of San Antonio, you can head back north to check out Austin. Austin's a great town. Austin's got South by Southwest, which is
next
music
week
festival next week. Exactly. I've never been to South by Southwest, but I've always wanted to go. But Austin is known for live music. It's amazing how much live music's down there. And it's not just country. There's lots of alternative. Obviously, there's some country music down there. And it's all mixed in with just this weird blend of what Austin is. And Austin's wear weird as a banner. Really, they're very proud. In fact, you'll see T-shirts around that say, "Keep Austin Weird." So Austin's always been a little bit of a challenge because near Austin, there's been a huge boom of technology. A lot of technology companies have moved into the area, so Austin's kind of fought to keep its weird personality. One really neat thing in Austin that I've heard and I've never done is on the Congress Street Bridge pretty much near the center of Austin, very close to. The largest population of urban bats live inside that bridge. And pretty much through the summer, you can hang out on the bridge and you can watch this flight of hundreds of thousands of bats spill out into the night as they go get food. Really cool. And it's right in the city. 6th Street, there's a ton of nightlife. 6th Street is known for its bars and its clubs and its music.
Okay.
After Austin, you can get back out to the country. Now, if I'm only giving you a week, you're going to have to huff it. And I've almost done this round trip before, but I would head out west a little bit. I'd scoop out into West Texas and see some of the wide open prairie, some of the plains, and you'll get a little bit of edge into the mountains. If you only have a week, you're really not going to have a ton of time to go see stuff like Fort Davis and Big Bend, which are not near anywhere. I mean, you go to those places only if you plan to go there because they're not on the way to anything. And they're a good 6 to 8 hours away from where you would be in the center of the state. But then scooping back around, you'd allow yourself to come back up to Dallas, which is in North Texas. Kind of North Texas is a difficult name. It's actually the northeast kind of corner of Texas is called North Texas, not like it's the Panhandle.
Okay.
So that would give you enough time to see some towns in between, get a flavor for that central region of Texas where a lot of Texas independence battles and also stories happen through there. It'd give you a chance to see the culture and the charm of San Antonio, the weirdness of Austin, and the great metropolitan feel for Dallas. And of course, I'm leaving out Houston, and I'm leaving out some other great, the Gulf Coast and the beaches of Texas. And I know those Texans are probably hating me right now for not talking about them, but I only have a week. Chris, what are you doing?
And you mentioned the Panhandle, just so people know, we're talking about the part that sticks up into Oklahoma there.
Yeah, it's that boxy part.
We're skipping that part too, Amarillo up there.
Yeah, Amarillo and Lubbock, a whole different beauty up there and some surprises that a lot of people have never seen. I grew up loving up there.
Okay. As I go to Texas and I bring my guidebook along, it's going to tell me to do some things that all the tourists do. What ones would you say, I see all the tourists do it, it seems like a waste of time to me?
San Antonio is number one on those, and Riverwalk and Alamo. And I will say they are worth it. But a few that I've been to that maybe are more C-list, maybe more like, okay, if you don't have a ton of time, these you can miss. I will say it, and gosh, I grew up in Houston, but Space Center Houston is really cool.
Uh-huh.
It is where the astronauts train, and that's where the command center for NASA for space missions happens. But it's just not as cool as where they launch, I will have to admit. So it's one of those that's great if you're in Houston, but I'd pass it for some other stuff, especially if you're down in the Houston area.
Okay.
And then another one I might say, and everybody knows this feature about Dallas if you've seen it, it's that ball that sticks up in the skyline.
Oh, sure.
That's got all the lights going all around. It's Reunion Tower. It's a little overrated. There's a restaurant up there and you can look around, but if you're in Dallas, there are cooler things to see than just the ball and the view from there. If you're in Dallas, you got other stuff to check out.
Okay. And then Texas, obviously a big state. There's all sorts of hidden treasures. A few of your favorites, things that you just wouldn't know unless you went to Texas with a Texan.
Man, there are so many cool little niches of Texas, and there's some weird stuff too. I think when you get a state this big, you'll get city names and town names that are the weirdest things because maybe we just ran out because we got too big. But down in the hill country in Hunt, Texas, there's Stonehenge 2. It's actually in this valley, a recreation of Stonehenge. So we've got our own Stonehenge here. I guess we felt like we needed one, so we didn't have to go across the pond. Also, out in Marfa. Marfa is in West Texas as you head out towards El Paso, towards just nothing. Near Marfa, out on the middle of just a road in nowhere, is a Prada store.
Okay.
Now, Prada being the beautiful
the purses,
sure.
Purses
and shoes. Well, Marfa has a budding artists community. Well, they decided that they would create an installation. And that installation, being a piece of art that's freestanding, you can interact with or walk through, is a Prada store out on a Texas highway in the middle of nowhere. And you can stop and look in the window where they have shoes. It's not an actual working Prada, but the lights come on at night. And it's the most surreal thing you've ever seen. Where it's just plains and mountains in the background and a Prada store with awnings. And
it's not in the middle of a town? It's just out alongside the highway?
Yeah, it's just out alongside the highway. You'd never know it was there unless you knew how to get there. Also in Marfa, strangely enough, a couple weird things about Marfa. There are the Marfa Mystery Lights. I've got some friends who've been out there. I didn't have a chance to go on my last trip, but the Mystery Lights, there is a viewing area. You can go out there, middle of nowhere, and you look out towards the mountains, and apparently there are dancing lights that happen. And a mystery is what they are. Some folks say that they're just the radio towers in the distance, but I've heard people say they've seen them, and I've heard people say it's a farce, but it's the Marfa Mystery Lights. Yeah. Also, another weird thing about Texas is in San Antonio, and I've heard this great legend. There are a set of railroad tracks in San Antonio where apparently, according to legend, a school bus of children was struck by a train or something very tragic. Well, on these tracks, the legend is that you can park your car and put it in neutral right on top of those tracks, and the children will push you over to safety. So who knows if that's real or not. But a lot of people go do it, and a lot of people try it. I've yet to get out there, but my wife wants us to go to see the ghost children. But other little things about Texas, just how big Texas is and how proud Texans are, and I think this just plays into how proud Texans are, is the fact that we have a Capitol building in Austin, which is the state capitol, is taller than any Capitol building in the United States, as well as taller than the nation's capital. It's the only Capitol that's taller. Also, the San Jacinto Monument, which is down near Houston, which marks the Battle of San Jacinto, which won independence for Texas.
Right.
Texas was its own nation after winning its independence from Mexico. That monument is the tallest stone column monument in the world and taller than the Washington Monument in Washington, D.C. So as it is, Texans like to make everything big, and they certainly like to brag. Oh, my goodness. I just bragged. Sorry.
Now, when we're coming down to Texas, what should we eat?
Food's one of my favorite things, and obviously barbecue is huge in Texas. There's a lot of ranching here, a lot of cattle, so you'll get a lot of beef barbecue. But there's also a lot of great Mexican food. And when we say Mexican food, it is Tex-Mex.
Right.
Our New Mexican brethren to the west would scoff at us, but we like putting chili on top of our enchiladas, and we certainly put a lot of cheese and chili and onions on just about everything when we have our Mexican food. It's got a lot of great tamales, a lot of great Tex-Mex food. Is kind of that infusion of border food from Mexico and some of the beef ranching food. But then also the surprise of Texas, and a lot of folks, those kind of folks who have asked me, so do you ride a horse to school when I was a kid? I said, no, we don't. A lot of people are surprised that Texas, it's not just about barbecue Mexican food. We also have some amazing culinary just masterpieces in some fantastic restaurants in both Houston, Austin, San Antonio, Dallas. All of them, you'll get some amazingly fine dining. So it's not all barbecue and Mexican food, but those by far are king in Texas, if you ask me.
And when we say barbecue in Texas, we're talking barbecue sauce, unlike, say, Memphis, where we talk about a barbecue rub, as I recall.
Very good. Yes,
okay.
Indeed.
Actually, we should say I have at least one friend who went to a conference in Texas, and I don't want to say the Texans eat a lot of beef, but the vegetarian option was chicken.
That sounds about right, you know. But also another food thing that people are surprised by is there's a lot of Texas wines.
That I didn't know. Okay.
My wife and I host a Texas Independence Day party every year. We've done it for 8 years now, which is kind of why the site Love for Texas came about.
Now, this is celebrating the previous independence, not asking for independence again.
Indeed.
Okay, just checking it.
There are Texans who would ask for independence again, but I'll tell you, I'm a proud American. But it's celebrating March 2nd, Texas Independence Day. We serve only Texas food, only Texas wine. We had somebody come in once, and they were real nice and everything, and brought some Coors Light, I think what it was. But we're like, sorry, you can't drink that here. That's from Colorado.
You have to have a Lone Star? Would it be a...
Lone Star is a Texas beer. And also Shiner was a great independent Texas beer. It's actually 100 years old this year. And actually, I'm drinking one right now, a 100-year commemorator in honor of Texas. But there's a ton of Texas wines. In our party, we always serve Texas wine. Down out west and then scooping through the hill country, vineyards have popped up over the last 10, 15 years. And they're actually excellent wines all the way up through the Panhandle.
I did not know that. But when it comes to wine, that's where us Californians get to be a little bit of snobs. So
I'll give you that. There's some amazing Californian wines, indeed. I think we're just trying to catch up.
And when we say getting around in Texas, we need a car.
Absolutely.
You might be flying from city to city, but if not, you're driving. That we're really in America here. You're not getting around on public transportation, I'm guessing.
Not at all. Both Houston and Dallas have gotten a lot better about it. But if you really want to see Texas, take a car. Of course, there's always flying, and Southwest Airlines, as you know, many travelers may know, started in Dallas.
Love Field.
Started here at Love Field, indeed. I actually worked for Southwest for a little while. So crazy fun airline, but it is an easy way to get over to El Paso or something like that if you want to quickly see another part of the state.
Right. Best day you've had in Texas?
You know, my best day probably happened last week, and that's kind of hard to pick because there's so many good days. But I actually took a road trip last week with a good friend of mine, and we headed out of Dallas, headed down to Washington on the Brazos on Texas Independence Day, where all the Texas flags are flying. Stopped in Brenham and had Dr. Pepper, which is from Texas, and then headed on over to San Antonio for the Alamo, to see the Alamo, to be in the culture, to be at that place that has such history for Texas. And the end of the day wound up in Del Rio, which is on the southern border of Texas, right along the Rio Grande. But just driving the car and seeing Texas go from kind of the lakes and plains that we have up here in Dallas, down through the piney woods, through the hill country, and then on down to the open desert near the Gulf where there are palm trees. It was a day where I was just reminded how, number one, huge Texas is, but also just how diverse it is.
Okay. We often talk when we're going to foreign countries about little language tips. Any language tips we need going down to Texas?
Well, there's a few words that definitely will help you. Y'all is just this wonderful operative word. I mean, it's word economy.
It's a word English needs, yeah.
Because it's you and it's all.
Right.
So y'all is great. And then also howdy. Many people won't say howdy to you, but if you head out west or if you're around College Station, where they're very proud of saying howdy, it's a very operative and wonderful word. And it's better than saying, how are you? Because you won't actually get anybody answering you, oh, I had a rotten day. You just say howdy, and they know you're just being friendly, saying hello.
Okay. I wasn't asking a question. I was just saying hi. Okay.
I was just saying hi.
One warning you would give?
A warning? I'd definitely say be prepared to drive. If you want to see much, you're going to have to drive in the big cities on the big interstates. Time things wisely. Don't go through at 8 and don't go through at 5, because if you are, you're probably going to get stuck in traffic, certainly in Austin, San Antonio, Dallas, and Houston. So time those drives well around those times a day.
And this is going to be a hard one. Of all the places in Texas that you have been, where do you go and say, thank God I live in Texas?
Wow. That is a tough one. And there are so many Texas places. But I will say, when I was down at Big Bend, and Big Bend is out in West Texas, down in the Scoop, where the Rio Grande River does a big old bend. When I was out at Big Bend last week, and we hiked out to a formation called Santa Elena Canyon, it's 1,500 feet tall, off the water, huge cliffs on either side of the Rio Grande that flows through. On the left side, it's Mexico. On the right side, it's the United States. And looking up at that canyon, it was bigger than life. And it was a thing where it was just so quiet, and you hear the river trickling and running through that canyon. It's a place of such peace, a place that's so otherworldly and not like the cities where I've grown up in. I was reminded, wow, this is Texas. And I was just so proud to be called a Texan, knowing that that was part of my state.
Excellent. You really know you're in Texas when what?
Well, you really know you're in Texas when you drive 15 hours and you're still in the same state.
And you haven't gotten lost, yeah.
Exactly. Really, you could stay on I-10 and drive all the way through Texas and half a day would pass. You really know you're in Texas when it's that big.
A coworker of mine just moved back east and drove through Texas on I-10, and yeah, I believe one of his Twitters was, and I'm still in Texas.
Yeah, it's big. That's for sure.
Interesting. The most memorable person you met. Who's the most quintessential Texan you've met?
I go exactly to one person, and I'm so happy. I was in rural Texas once. I was driving from Dallas to Roswell, New Mexico, where my wife is from. And we stopped in rural Texas. My son was an infant, and so we had to stop to feed, which really makes that trip even longer. But I sat down on a bench and a gentleman wearing a cowboy hat walked out and he asked where we were from and he introduced himself that he was the mayor of the town of Rural, Texas. And I don't know, Rural maybe has 200 people, maybe 300 people. It can't be that big. It's just a whisper as you drive through. But we're sitting there talking about his town, talking with the mayor of Rural, Texas, and he was the friendliest, kindest kind of person you'd ever want to meet. And he told us stories about how his wife ran the antique shop. There was a couple doors down, about how we should come back to Rural and shop and see it and be part of Rural. And he was just genuinely proud of his city or his town, really, and was just a wonderful character to meet. He was a wonderful embodiment of a Texan being so friendly, and he was the mayor.
Interesting. And the last assignment, and you knew it was coming, if you had to summarize the whole great state of Texas, once an independent nation, now the second largest state in the U.S., largest in the lower 48, in 3 words, what 3 words would you use?
Well, this one comes as no surprise. Big.
Big. Well, I think that was a gimme there, actually.
So I only have to name 2. Proud would definitely be the word. Texans are very proud. And friendly. Tejas is the origin for the name Texas. It means it's Indian. It means friendly. And so Texans, definitely friendly.
Excellent.
I was just thinking about it. I didn't even talk about the 6 flags of Texas. You know, your 6 flags. It's the 6 nations that Texas was once part of through history.
Okay, that's right. Okay, 6 flags. Spain, Mexico, the Republic of Texas, the United States, and I'm missing then 2.
France.
Oh, Maximilian.
Which was after Spain, and the Confederate States of America. The
CSA. Okay.
Yeah.
Wouldn't have thought to count that, but sure.
So, but, you know, people are like, hey, let's go to Six Flags Magic Mountain or something like that. And you're like, you know, those 6 flags actually started here in Texas. The whole reason is, you know, those 6 flags. So,
right.
Which we got a 6 Flags over Texas here, which kind of makes sense.
Dennis, thanks so much for coming on the show. The website, again, lovefortexas.com. Check it out. And remember, at least 2 big airlines are headquartered in Dallas there, so it shouldn't be hard to get to Texas.
Exactly. Yep.
Thanks so much for coming on the show, Dennis.
Thank you, Chris.
I'm going to skip internet resources because I'm trying to get out this podcast in a bit of a time crunch. In news from the community, I had a great encouraging letter from Tamar, who is from Israel. And Tamar wrote and said, I apologize for the lateness. I'm a bit behind on my podcast. I just wanted to say how interesting I found your episode on Israel. Understandably, I didn't expect to like it, because that's my home he's talking about, but he presented a completely different viewpoint. I'm not used to hearing it from a tourist, definitely not a non-Jewish tourist. I was very impressed at his accuracy and his pure love for this country. That said, I'm surprised Doug didn't talk much about Israel's natural beauty. He did mention its diversity, but I would really recommend seeing some of the other regions. He mentioned the Galilee, but what should be said is that Galilee is at its prettiest in the spring when it's all green and full of flowers. The other stunning area is the Negev Desert in the south, which is so colorful, though very hot. I'd go there in the winter. Israelis have a natural love for hiking and seeing the land, and those 2 areas in particular, as well as the rest of the country, can provide an endless hikes for those who are so inclined. Then again, like Doug said, you can't see everything, but it's definitely worth pointing out that there's more to Israel than the cities. Thanks. Keep up the great work. Tamar from Israel. Thanks very much. It's always encouraging to know that maybe we got it right, and Doug certainly did a great job on that show. And as I said, we're probably going to have him come on again and talk in more detail about Jerusalem coming up here in a couple months. Allison wrote me an email. It said, Chris, I just wanted to thank you for the podcast on biking through Central Asia. I spent a summer in northeastern China and even spent a couple of weekends up in the Tian Shan Mountains that your guest mentioned. That part of the world is so incredibly beautiful and so rarely visited. Your guest's pictures brought tears to my eyes as I remembered the beauty of the mountains and the hospitality of the Kazakhs living in China who welcomed us into their yurts. I love to listen to all your podcasts, but especially the ones on harder to reach parts of the world. Thank you, Allison. Well, I hope you weren't too disappointed with Texas, which is a little easier to reach, but I was glad you enjoyed the podcast on Central Asia. I enjoy doing a mixture of the places that I may never get to and the places that I could get to next weekend, so I'm hoping that's working out for everyone else. I do want to remind you that if you could, I certainly would appreciate it if you could vote for the Amateur Traveler for the Lonely Planet Award that it's up for. That's one that I'd love to win, and I do need your help. I'm running third place right now, although we've pulled ahead, so I'm hoping we'll close the gap here in the final remaining 9 days. I'll put a link in the show notes to where you can go. Just go to amateurtraveler.com, and there's a logo right there. And you need to vote by March 20th, 2009. If you're listening to this after this, I apologize. If you would like to rate The Amateur Traveler, host at amateurtraveler.com or leave a comment at amateurtraveler.com. And as always, thanks so much for listening.